Greiner Talks, about sustainability and transformation. A Greiner podcast episode.
This is Greiner Talks, our podcast about sustainability and transformation. My name is Alexander, and our topic today is change. And I think it's safe to say that I'm speaking to a change expert from the Netherlands today. She is the founder and director of ImpactHub Amsterdam. She is advising the city of Amsterdam on impact entrepreneurship, and she's also on the University of Amsterdam Sustainability Board. Welcome, Tatjana Glad.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for taking your time, Tatiana. And as most of my interview partners, I think that you're sitting in the home office, if I'm correct.
That's correct.
Still not getting out of there?
Well, hopefully by the time people are listening to this, we're out and free and roaming on our bikes, between office and home again.
Tatiana, before we start off with the interview, I'd like to get to know you a little bit as a person. And I know that you're originally from Canada, and I'm always very curious to know what's the journey of a person. So how did you end up in the Netherlands?
Oh, that's a good question. And I guess there's a couple of angles to this. I mean, the easiest is to say I have Dutch heritage, and I was curious to check it out and kind of come back to the motherland, if you will. But at the time, it was... I had done a master's in responsible business practice, and I was quite intrigued by where innovation was in terms of sustainability. And I think because the Netherlands has been quite well known for social innovation over, a number of decades in different aspects of how it manages life and people, an economy. To me, it was just a place that I was very, very curious about spending a couple of years in to learn about how they were approaching sustainability and how they were approaching social innovation. But that learning edge turned into starting a business here. And then I ended up staying to run this business.
So there are quite a few differences between Canada and the Netherlands. What fascinates you most about the Netherlands, or what are the biggest differences between these two countries?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference that comes to mind right away is just the size of the land mass, right? And I think, but what that does is it lends the citizenship to a different relationship with the land. And so while there's still a lot uncultivated or yet to discover in Canada, there's a lot of wilderness. Here, there's a relationship with the land where it's very much about, managing density of people and sort of relationship of people between people, unlike the lack of land. And so the way that people have innovated, the way people create built environments, the relationship between sort of rural and urban, to me, is different here.
And I know that sustainability plays quite a big role in the Netherlands. Just recently, a colleague mentioned to me that in the Netherlands, sustainability is a way of life. It's much more than just one energy efficiency project or something like that. What's your impression?
Well, I think I'd say in my crowd, a lot of people sound like your colleague, but I wouldn't say that's everywhere. But I do think because of the relationship with space, and so the density of people, there's a different attitude towards resource use. And I think in the past, that's lent itself to efficiency of resource use. And I think in our sort of, global challenges right now, it's lent itself more to circular thinking, circular economy, these kinds of terms, to really think beyond just efficiency, how resources are also nutrients for the next level of their process.
Just recently, I read an article. It was titled, "When Will the Netherlands Disappear?" And it was talking obviously about the very special geographic situation, because more than 50% of the country are lying below sea level. And so climate change and rising sea levels, they are seriously threatening Amsterdam and the Netherlands. Do you think that has an impact on society? Is climate change more tangible than it is in other countries?
I think that's really interesting. I get the same question from a lot of Canadian friends. So I find that conversation tends to be alive more outside of the Netherlands than in the Netherlands. So I think there's a lot of people worried about us. I think here we have a lot of trust in the institutions still. We have a lot of trust in the infrastructure. We have a lot of trust in the engineering and such. And so whether that's malplaced, I don't think a lot of us like to look at that yet. I do find, that there is more and more concern arising for climate change. So I think these questions are coming to the forefront. I don't have a lot of people who have moved, out of the city for reasons of being at 5 meters below sea level to trying to go above sea level. I don't hear that as a reason very often yet. I think it's more for, connecting to nature. But I guess that remains to be seen.
So we are seamlessly transitioning into the topic of sustainability already. And Tatjana, I'd like to start with a slightly unusual question, because when I asked you if you want to participate in that podcast, you immediately said yes. Weren't you hesitant in joining the sustainability podcast of an international company with like more than 11,000 employees that is producing foam and plastics?
Well, that's interesting. When you put it that way, and maybe I think twice now. No, I came via our colleagues at ImpactHub Vienna, who have gotten to know you. And so for me, that's the trust, right? That you trust people that refer you, in a good way. So it's that chain of trust. But I think that actually, the fact that you're addressing these issues and the fact that you're educating folks even beyond your own staff members, with a podcast like this, to me, that's really important. We can't ignore the problem. We can't put it under a rug. We can't not talk to people. We have a term in Impact Hub called unlikely allies, saying, sometimes we need to talk to the unlikely ally because there's a lot to learn in that space. So no, I think it's a great opportunity to talk to employees, but also to learn from you.
I'm very glad you took that opportunity, Tatjana. And you have already mentioned ImpactHub Amsterdam. So can you explain what is ImpactHub Amsterdam? What's your mission and what kind of impact do you actually want to create there?
So our mission, and we've gone sort of like full on this year to say we want to make impact the norm. And what that means is positive impact for a more inclusive society, a more sustainable society, one that is socially just, that is circular in how it approaches, its resourcing and such. And so the work that we do is with SMEs and corporates and other organizations to try and advance the impact. So sometimes it's working with employees, sometimes it's working, with others. But the idea there is that we connect them often with entrepreneurs and innovations from our community of impact entrepreneurs.
So you have mentioned that you want to make societies more inclusive, more sustainable, more socially just. And that's exactly what social entrepreneurs, what social businesses try to do. And I'm curious to know, or I'm wondering, in the 21st century, do companies or businesses that do not contribute to positive change or to solving environmental problems, do they even have a right to exist as of today?
That's a pretty strong question. What I do see over the years, because I've been in this field for a while now in social business, and what we are seeing is there's a move from being just compliant, just checking off boxes, to do the bare minimum, such as, let's say environmental, safety and such like that, moving to more of the innovation piece. And so I think there you're seeing that companies are seeing an opportunity to move beyond, just earning their social license to actually creating more value for society. And I have no doubt it's going in that direction, sometimes slower than I'd like it to go in, sometimes slower for the innovation departments or, entrepreneurs within a company. But I definitely think it's moving in that direction. And I think more and more people are questioning the role of companies in society. We see this from the youth, we see this from governments, we see this from different parties. And again, it varies in different parts of the world and different markets.
The conversation today is titled Change from Within. And I'd like to know from you, Tatjana, what do you understand by change from within?
Well, first of all, I really commend you on your ambitious statement. I think Greiner's not being shy about what it wants to become and what it wants to put out in the world. And I think that's really wonderful to hear. And I think that for me, change from within is about liberating the talents of employees, of staff, of all the folks who work within the company and within the value chain of that company. And so there's a term out there called intrapreneurs. I don't know if any of you have heard of this, or if anybody wants to, Google what an intrapreneur is, so with an I, and that's someone who acts in an entrepreneurial way which for me is really about amassing those resources and those sort of more innovative ways of working from within an organization as opposed to building their own enterprise. And I think these kinds of people who could be sitting anywhere in the organization because it's not on a business card are really valuable to create change from within because they see opportunities and they see different ways that things can be done. And so to me, I think that's part of the future of change from within.
Why is it so incredibly difficult to change things? Why is it so difficult to change for people in general, to change for myself? It seems to be kind of a difficult or tricky thing to do.
Yeah, it seems to be. I think, this is the thing about human nature. I even find, working with entrepreneurs, sometimes, when it comes to personal change and personal sacrifice, it's not always easy to do. It might depend on, how we've grown up and the uncertainty we've felt or we haven't felt growing up. But I think it's also hard because we exist within rather entrenched systems, whether it is the corporate system, whether it is an industry system, whether it is, a larger system that we depend on, such as health, energy, and such. And I think it's very hard to kind of steer that ship when it's a big ship. If you're in a smaller system, right, it's like a sailboat, you can more dynamically steer it. And I think it's hard because we need the collaboration of other people. So getting that kind of level of collaboration to make something bigger move, we know is hard. And so it's kind of easier to sit back and kind of say, oh, well, maybe not right now. Maybe I can put it off for a bit.
Definitely sounds easier to just stick to business as usual, but that's what we don't want to do. And Tatjana, another buzzword that's floating around these days is resilience. Can you very briefly explain for us what is resilience and why is it so important for companies and for society?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because I have a colleague in Venezuela who did a talk last year about the difference between resilience and anti-fragile. And so resilience, I notice, tends to be quite a trendy word, probably, in sort of the Northern Hemisphere and maybe like Europe, because it's really about bouncing back. And I think it gives us the hope that we can withstand shocks and come back to normal, right? We all want to come back to normal. But actually, we might not be able to come back to normal. And so we also have to build this ability to be anti-fragile. So not to break if something's different and doesn't just kind of resume its original form. So if you're learning from natural systems, it's really about coming back, to original form. And I think with companies, there's no guarantee companies are going to come back to their original form or how it was. And so I think, this resilience one is personal, but also at an organizational level to be able to not just be resilient, but actually be able to morph and change. It goes back to your original question about change, I think, to blend both being resilient with the capacity to change.
So you clearly see a relationship between change and resilience here.
Yeah, I do. I think I've learned that over the last year. At first, the word resilience was a very easy word to say, like, we need to be resilient because we need to be strong and we need to stand, in front of this change and be able to come back to the way we are. And I think some fundamental things are shifting. So it might not be about coming back to the exact same form or shape. Things might shift and change. And so how do we find a way to hold strong from within, resilient, right? But also know that it might be a different form that we're moving into.
And probably that's a good thing to not come back to the form as it used to be before, because apparently it didn't work out that way.
It's a good one. And I think this is also deeply personal. I think for some people, there's a lot of sadness, and regret and loss around things that are no longer working the way that they worked, especially if people have dedicated 30, 40 years of their life, to learning in a career. And this suddenly seems like it's the end, of a way of working. Like, is it the end of plastics? People have dedicated their life and were part of the amazing innovation of plastics in the 60s and 70s, right? When this was the solution to a lot of things. I can imagine there's sadness to see something end, or there's resistance. And at the same time, those are the very people that need to be in the conversation and in the next step of innovation, because they hold the keys to understanding something from within and understanding something a little bit, change a little bit more intimately, because they've already been part of the growth of something.
Well, we clearly believe that it's not the end of plastics, but we believe that it's the end of plastics in a linear business model. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we are facing, to bring that kind of linear model into a circular one. And you have mentioned before that it's very difficult to change systems, to change existing structures. Do you have any kind of advice for us as a company? How can we facilitate that kind of change?
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen is that it's difficult. And at the same time, those people who embrace the opportunity and embrace the challenge of innovation and embrace a new narrative around what they're putting out in the world and how they're doing that, one, have a lot more fun. And secondly, it's less difficult. The day-to-day work might be difficult, but it's less difficult to overcome the resistance. It's less difficult to test things out and prototype things and to learn from it. And so I think that's one thing. I think the second thing is not expect it all to be perfect, right? To really, prototype and iterate and learn and accelerate your capacity to get feedback and to take the next step going forward. So to really become a learning organization or a learning team in this. I think that's another thing that I see very important and makes a big difference.
So if you want to bring about change, you also need to create an environment that is supportive of change, of innovation, and that encourages people to actually bring up crazy ideas and to think outside of the box. Do you have any advice for us? What can we do to create such an environment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, one, there's a lot of people think the only way to do it is a formal mandate for that. And of course that helps. It helps if your company can be explicit about what it wants to become or what its goals it's setting for 2025 and 2030 and 2050, right? But I also believe strongly in culture and is the way people are with each other. And can peers help each other, right? And innovate across silos, right? Across seniority levels, across, functional groups and such. And that comes with those informal meetings that happen anyways. So if and I think it's harder in these times because in virtual times, we don't always run into each other at the coffee machine, or the people, I don't know, who are having smokes outside or whatever, however people, information travels. I think we need to create more of those informal spaces in these virtual times to allow for that cross-filtration across formal groups, so that they happen in the informal spaces and they can be seated. So I think that's important. And I think the other thing is that, those people who are, just looking at your job and looking at, what you know and what you'd like it to become and, offer your expertise to other parts of the business, or offer expertise to your own team to think differently and allow some of that space and some of that crazy thinking, without saying that, the crazy thinking has to be an action, coming out of the meeting, to just allow space for that.
I fully agree that we need to create that kind of spaces and that we need to create that kind of culture, which is not an easy task, especially not in a company that exists for more than 150 years. In that regard, I'd like to get from you another hint. So let's assume that I want to make some positive impact within my company. I might be working in production, I might be working in accounting, in marketing. What can I do to contribute to such big goals of becoming climate neutral, of becoming a circular business? How can I contribute to that kind of change from within?
Well, I think, anyone, wherever they're sitting, can contribute to change if they have a mindset for it, if they're interested in it, if they want to. And I think that's looking at wherever you're sitting. So I don't agree it only has to be people in the sustainability department, because actually what we need is that the kind of change we need to see in companies going forward needs to touch on the core business. So that means everyone. It could, it means anyone who's touching any part of the product, any part of the finance, any part of the marketing, like everybody plays a role in that. So I think, it could be interesting to look at wherever you're sitting, what can you do? And maybe it starts with something small, but all those small things can add up. The ideal would be that your small project connects with somebody else's small project and somebody else's, and you start to see patterns. And that's what starts to lead to what, we call a little bit more systemic change, is when you start to see those patterns that all add up. But I would say asking yourself, the question of what can I do from where I am is the starting point.
Tatiana, I'd love to ask more questions about that topic of change and resilience and innovation and so on, but we are slowly approaching the end of our conversation already. But before we end, I'd like to invite you for a short word wrap, if that's fine for you.
Sure.
So I would give you one word and you can answer with whatever you like. Can be one sentence or just one word. What comes to your mind first? So the first term would be impact.
I think positive change. I think people, planet, profit.
Plastics.
I think utility. I think malleability. I think innovation.
Amsterdam.
I think canals. I think history. I think merchant trade and social responsibility.
Spring.
Crocuses.
The North Sea.
Cold.
Fridays for Future.
Absolutely.
And last but not least, your message to the world.
Start from where you are, dream big, and just start downloading that dream piece by piece.
I love that message. As always, a very hopeful note to end on. Thank you so much for the conversation, Tatjana.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks to everyone for listening. If you have any feedback on this podcast, please get in touch with me. Just visit sustainability.greiner.com. You will find my contact details there. And in the meantime, subscribe to the podcast, stay healthy, and have a great day.
Greiner Talks, a Greiner podcast. Subscribe now.